Hey, what's up, tribe? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the TFC Audio Project Down Under. This week I chat with Tom O'Halloran from Mechanics of Movement. Tom is a physiotherapist and exercise scientist with a special interest in biomechanics, strength and conditioning, and really anything movement related. Throughout the episode, we talk through Tom's evolving journey with his approach to physio and rehab, the critical importance of building self-efficacy for clients and clinicians, the fundamentals of biomechanics and how it can be helpful for problem solving, as well as the use of play-based approaches for skill learning and whole body integration.
This week's episode is brought to you by our TFC online store. By showing your support there, it supports us and means that we can keep on doing what we love, and that's helping our community, our TFC tribe, reclaim strong, resilient, pain-free bodies from the ground up. We now have a range of products from Wild Toes, our toe spacers, to cork mobility balls, hacky sacks that are handmade in Guatemala, and of course our TFC balance beams. $5 from every order also goes towards planting a tree with our partnership with Reforest Now. And to say a big thanks to all of our podcast listeners, we now have a special discount just for you. If you use the code DOWNUNDER, that's down under one word, at checkout, you'll get 10% off your next order. Just head to tfc-shopaus.com to check it out.
All right, so Tom, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, mate.
No worries. Thanks for having me, James.
It's been a long time coming. We've been in touch sort of through Instagram mostly over the past year or so, I think, or maybe a couple of years. I don't know. Time's flying these days. And then we finally caught up in Melbourne when we were last there for a workshop, which you came along to. And then we also had a massive chat on the phone a few weeks back about a lot of different stuff, which probably could have been a whole podcast in itself if we'd recorded it. But yeah, no, I've been really really excited to get you on the podcast to have a proper recorded chat.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think it's just so good to, just social media and online just allows us to kind of connect with like-minded therapists and physios. And I just reckon it's such a good medium for that. And then it's even better when you can catch up in person. And yeah, as you said, we can pretty much talk movement and strength training and all sorts of different topics all day. So yeah, it's good to have those like-minded practitioners in physio.
Oh mate, it's so good. Yeah, you're exactly right. Instagram is that really good medium to facilitate those connections, but you can't really get a full proper dialogue going on Instagram. So where I usually like to start with these podcasts, obviously I know a fair bit already about you, but just for those who are listening and maybe don't know, just I guess about your story, what you do, why you do it, how you like, just your journey so far with movement and physio and anything pretty much.
Yeah, awesome, cool. So I grew up in Victoria, so by the coast in a town called Ocean Grove, and I was always into sport, so played heaps of footy or AFL, cricket, tennis, pretty much anything I could get my hands on. So I was always just running and jumping and just trying to do anything that was athletic related. And then when I sort of finished school, I decided that physio is probably a good path to take to kind of combine that sort of challenge knowledge or theoretically, but then have that ability to incorporate exercise and rehab and that movement side as well. So I went to La Trobe in 2005 or 6, and then finished in 2009. So I've been a physio for 12 years.
Yeah,
and
right.
then I think the other part of me that was sort of motivated was my uncle. He's an Australian trained physio, but he moved to the US and he really became quite a highly skilled manual therapist over there. So he owns a clinic, and in 4th year I did an internship with him. And I remember just going there and just seeing how he operated. And he had this massive gym, and it was very much like patients would come in, he'd do some manual therapy, and then they'd do their rehab program. So there'd be lots of people in the gym all the time, and it was all sort of open spaced. really sort of rehab focused. But he taught Maitland physio courses over there, and I
Ah.
remember, back in 2009, I remember just going there, and he was just the best physio I'd ever ever seen, basically. And he just had this amazing ability to like, use his hands for manual therapy. And I remember I'd just done a really bad ankle sprain playing footy before I left here, and I actually went over there and I played AFL in the States, so for the Philadelphia Hawks, I think it was.
Oh, right. There you go.
Yeah, it was awesome. It's good fun. And I just remember, like, my ankle was still troubling me, and he just said, "Oh, just come over here." And he did this like little mob on my ankle. So basically, for anyone who doesn't know, just like a passive, gentle sort of stretch, and just immediately it felt 100%. And then I
Wow.
played the rest, and I was just kind of really shocked and like interested how he had this ability to use his hands to get these results. And I just was so frustrated that I didn't have that. And I was always more interested in sort of the strength and his gym stuff and movement. And then, just a few other patients I'd see, someone coming in with just really limited shoulder range, so shoulder movement. And I'd assess them and he'd come in and he'd just do like this little mobilization, so sort of passive pressing down on a joint basically in his lower neck. And the person would just gain a lot more shoulder range. And so from there, I finished uni and I just thought, I'm just going to be like my uncle. Like, he's awesome. If I can get that skill, I'm just going to be the most valuable practitioner. And so then I started working in private practice, and it was a bit not the greatest sort of setup, where it was lots of passive treatment in my first job, lots of heat pack, TENS
Yeah.
machines, moving
Yeah.
between rooms. So I didn't really have a mentor, and I just felt quite overwhelmed with trying to fix these people so quickly when they were coming in with chronic issues. So I was starting to lose that, like, I don't know if these I don't know if I have that skill to help people like my uncle does. And then, so I was a bit disillusioned. I worked for 18 months. Then I went backpacking for a year. When I went backpacking, I was just certain that I wasn't going back to physio. And I was probably like 23, 24 at the time. Came back after a year of traveling. And then I actually got a job with the TAC. So the TAC is like Transport Accident Commission. So the compensable basically, if anyone's been in a motor vehicle accident, they can get compensation for their medical treatment through the TAC. And so my job was basically sitting behind a computer and processing claims. And I just thought, I'll
Fun.
give it a shot. And I lasted 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, I said, no, physio is awesome. Like, I'm on my feet, teaching movement still. I just need to carve out a path for me. I don't want to be in rooms. I don't want to be putting heat packs on, rubbing people's backs lying on their stomach. So then I just committed to doing as much. I realized that the reason I didn't like it, one reason was because I didn't feel confident. And then I just committed to doing PD. So I did so many weekend PD courses, so professional development. Did every like spinal, Mackenzie, Maitland, Mulligan, Peter O'Sullivan, Explain Pain, all these must courses. And I remember doing like 2-3 in consecutive weekends and coming back to work and then realizing that I hadn't even used anything from the first weekend. And then I remember going to a Mulligan, I think it was an upper limb course, and it was the same thing. It's all these really like zoomed in, hyper focused like mobilizations with movement of the elbow.
Yeah.
And so the Sunday night came in around, and I just again realized that I was not going to use any of this. And I was still on this search for like, I just need to find this perfect technique, and I need to work out how to use my hands and how to mobilize these joints. I just don't have it yet. And so again, I sort of kept searching. I'd spent time at Melbourne Headache Centre, thinking I might like working on I don't know what, but migraines and doing really specific mobilizations to C2, and worked with an awesome, or just did some hours with an awesome physio there. And same thing, I just felt like he had it and I didn't. So it was this recurring sort of feeling that like I wasn't good enough yet. I couldn't feel what these guru physios felt. And then, sort of kept going down that path, kept working in private, did a little bit of sports work around Melbourne, not heaps, and then did a little bit of post-grad study, so a Musk grad cert, sort of the half of the Musk Masters. And with that, I think I got, so basically the first half is you do the grad cert, and then the second half is a Masters. So I finished the grad cert and then just realised that I just wasn't that interested in it. And so I got my grad cert but didn't go on to finish the Masters. And then I was sort of a bit lost as to where to go, because I was still in rooms treating chronic issues, trying to use my hands, getting nowhere. And I think anyone who treats pain probably has this same realization after 7 or 8 years, that when you work, you want to see results for your effort and your like improvement. And I'm always someone who like I want to put effort in and I want to get better and better, but I wasn't seeing any better results. So it's probably 7 years in and I wasn't getting any better results than I was as a new grad. And then I was also really frustrated by seeing someone who came in with pain, and then I would do all the right things, like in terms of, what the evidence would say, what I should have been doing for that issue, and they just didn't get better. And I just felt like there's no way to predict how to treat people like that. And then I just couldn't see how this was sustainable because I wasn't getting results for effort. So I lost a bit of motivation with the PD courses and just sort of started working 4 days a week and put in sort of less effort. It just became like a cruisy-ish job. It was kind of oldies. And then, same sort of thing. I hit that realization that this is a job for the next 30, 40 years. I need to try and find something that's like, I was barely even able to finish the week because I didn't dislike it. I just disliked the lack of meaning in it. So you weren't, getting results for the amount of effort, study, basically, that sort of whole life after school had led to this point where I was just rubbing backs again.
That's tough.
And then so I just realized I had to change. So I looked around, enrolled in a master's in strength and conditioning, because I was always really interested in just the way the states operated, and some of the strength and conditioning guys over there who'd sort of managed to mix S&C and rehab. And then I did that through ECU, just really part-time over 4 years. And through that, I just realized that I was actually should have been an S&C coach, or I should have been an exercise physiologist, because it just really fit my view of the world a lot better. And I loved that zoomed out approach where I could look at someone move, or I could look at their function, I could look at them walking, I could look at them getting up from a chair or bending, and I could start to see where they might be having an issue rather than focusing on the pain. And then I started to focus on function, and then things just got heaps more interesting for me. And I started to delve into different areas. So from biomechanics to learning about motor learning. And then from there, I just realized that movement was the thing that I was always interested in. So movement and function, basically. And then, so I finished the S&C Masters, and then started to use a lot more of that. And I think the thing about S&C, which if you do just a straight like physio degree without exercise science, you sort of miss the key concepts of exercise science. So it's the simplest things like progressive overload, specific adaptation, even that periodization to an extent. I think if you just go on those first principles, it can really guide your treatment straight away for most conditions. But I think sometimes in physio, what I missed, maybe not what all courses miss, but I missed that like we should make most decisions of how to treat someone on those first principles, which is the body will adapt, the body's resilient, or the body's also, we can get hypersensitive if we fear avoid. And that's where, that sort of pain science knowledge helped as well. And I sort of mixed that with kind of the S&C side. And then, I pretty much just started to treat based on those kind of simple principles. And I'd still look at the physio evidence and, how do you treat this? But I'd look at it way, way less, as opposed to just how do I load this? How do I unload this? Why is this sensitive? Why is it not? How's this person moving? What are their movement habits? What are their health habits? And I think that was another thing that really, really helped me. So when I did the S&C, I just realized how many gaps in knowledge I had as a physio, and I thought I knew everything about it. Like I'd done every physio course on every joint in the body. And I realized that for 8 years, I'd only learnt off physios, and I hadn't learnt off, osteos, chiros, myos, S&C coaches, exercise scientists, yoga teachers. And then I just started to really realize that a lot of other people have the knowledge that are that gaps. And I started to really respect probably other professions a lot more, because in my early days, I think, again, not bagging out physio too much, but I think we have this real obsession with like being so evidence-based, which is good, but it also makes us occasionally have this air of superiority about us. And so then we might think, I'm not learning off that profession, it's not evidence-based. But maybe it's, there's a lot that could be learned if we're more, I guess, kind of humble about what we don't know. And that's what I guess I tried to be and still try to be. So try and sort of learn off now the people that get kind of that art of movement, rather than like just the science-based definitions all the time. And then, so I still kept sort of searching for the right job. I worked for the Defence Force for about 3 years, and that was awesome. So I learnt heaps about, just lower limb injury, treated like some pilots and stuff with the Air Force in Newcastle, and then worked with the School of Infantry out in like the Hunter Valley, New South Wales. So that was like 17, 18-year-olds going through like recruit school. So that was a super interesting job. Saw a lot of like hip, femoral neck stress fractures and just shin splints. But the same sort of thing kept coming to me, this frustration of like, we're the physios and we wait for the injury and then we treat it. So we're very reactive. And it was the same thing. The same group had come through. They'd spend 3 months in Wagga Wagga. Then they'd come to us, Singleton. And a lot of them had already done their injury. So they've been overloaded. They came to us week 2 and they've got a tibial stress fracture. And like, it was good because I'd really learned how to diagnose and treat it and the loading. But I was just frustrated because I just thought, can't we prevent some of this? Like, is there not anything done 3 months earlier? And there was bits and pieces, but I just couldn't be this person who just sat and waited reactively. And so I spent, like the next probably year. So I left that job actually just sort of situationally, but spent the next year locuming around Australia for the Defence Force. So from Townsville to WA to, I didn't go to Darwin, I was going to go to Darwin, but all around Victoria and then, New South Wales. And I was sort of searching for a role there that would let me do prevention. So look at how to prevent some of this stuff. And I think after a while I just realized that that path was a bit hard because it's a bit hard to try and change such a massive structure as defense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, so I sort of eventually gave up on that idea, but I still knew that I was really interested in that, movement, health, and injury prevention. And so that's when I sort of realized that the job didn't particularly exist. That there's probably some high level roles with maybe women's football in injury prevention, or there's obviously S&C roles in like AFL and pro sport, but I wasn't that interested in working with that. So then I just thought, oh, if I am really interested in injury prevention, physio, biomechanics, S&C combined, and it doesn't exist, I've probably got to try and create something that does combine those. And that's when I sort of just started coming up with different ideas and sort of developed mechanics of movement. And then I just started a Instagram page, and that was just like exercise ideas. So it was as much a way of like learning for me and being sort of accountable, and even trying to improve my own movement. So I'd obviously put up like different videos of me trying different movements, and a lot of that was like, okay, how much can I improve my own movement? How adaptable is my body? Because if I can figure that out, if I can improve my own movement, it'll give me a lot of confidence to send that message to someone else that they're resilient, they're adaptable. This is how you can change if you're persistent. And so that was kind of a secondary thing that helped, just with my motivation, just kind of feeling, although no one cared, but I felt a bit accountable. It's like, oh, I better put up some exercises or some different ideas. And then, that sort of got a few more followers with that. And that obviously increased my motivation to keep going. And then, just the start of this year, I started working out of 2 gyms. So not full time at the moment. So I do a few different things, but what I do there is basically nearly all hands off, so exercise based, and I try and do sort of longer assessments. So just trying to really get to the bottom of what's going on with the person if they're injured or if they want to improve their performance. But to me, I want to help them sort of long term, because it's not satisfying to me just getting that quick fix at all. And I still see the value and benefit in manual therapy. It's just that I don't want to do it.
Fair enough.
It's just, I feel like I can offer a lot more value by getting that, improving someone's movement and function, because that's long term. And if you improve someone's function, then it's just got way more powerful repercussions than if I focus on just getting them out of pain today or tomorrow. And that's that's sort of my motivation, to keep pushing that and push the sort of exercise rehab role.
Yeah, man. Well, you touched on heaps of good points there. Like, I always love hearing people's story, because especially people in this space and people who are in our community, I suppose, a lot of practitioners have had a very similar experience where they get out, they learn, well, they get in and they learn their profession, and that, we learn physio, and some people learn chiro and so on. And some people just stick with that profession. They only do physio courses, and they just read all the physio research, and they just stay in their physio bubble. But the people who actually broaden out and look at what other people are doing, and like you said, regardless of whether, it's research based or not, like obviously we want to be evidence based practitioners, but research evidence is only one pillar of evidence based practice. So, I think people can get very caught up in the research evidence and then miss out on that broader perspective that really needs to be addressed as any health professional, regardless of what profession you are. If you're a health professional, you need to be across all aspects of health. And that
Yes.
doesn't mean you have to be prescribing everything, but you have to understand how the whole system works together. And I think, that's what you were talking about with physio. Like I was the same. I think we did one semester, like 1 6-month block on exercise prescription, where we'd go into the gym and things like that. But it wasn't an education in movement. It was exercise focused. And then we learnt about how the body works on a very granular level, all the anatomy and physiology and everything, but not really, we didn't really learn, and we certainly didn't practice as part of the course how to integrate the body in a functional way with movement, and also how much of a role that other pillars of health play, like sleep and nutrition and all of these things. And so I think that's the story of the world right now, or so far, especially the Western world, is such an isolated, specialized approach, where a lot of things get missed. Obviously there's a role for specialization, but it's very easy to miss things when you only got one lens. And so,
Yes. Definitely.
just like you and throughout your journey, you've done a bunch of physio courses. Sounds like you've done a lot more than me. But I've done a bunch of courses, but I've also done, a bunch of, I guess, programs around movement and learning different systems of movement, from animal flow to
That's such
calisthenics
a
to
powerful
hand
tool.
balancing to, all of these things, and realizing most people, it's all principles of movement, and it's just
100%.
things that people is standard fundamental things that people should be able to do. And you could take your hands to anyone with any kind of problem, but if they're not hitting some basic standards of movement, then they're just going to keep coming back either with the same problem or with some other problem that's manifesting in a different way, pretty much.
Definitely. I think, you hit on a really good point. So, although I've done a lot of those courses, I could have got just as much value or more in just doing like one movement course,
Yeah, yeah,
because every one of those courses broke the body down into each joint, and like it caused me to zoom in rather than zoom out.
yeah.
And if you go back to like, I think with when physios or chiros just learn off their own profession, it's very easy to get like that because your profession becomes your sort of like tribe almost,
Your
and
identity.
your
Yeah,
your identity. Yeah, so it's like people identify with being a physio and they trust. They've got a circle of trust within it,
yeah,
and once you sort of lose, so I don't. I mean, I still call myself a physio, but not really. Like I'm, I kind of am, but just as much like a movement or like strength conditioning coach, I guess. And I think that what I realized was that you talk about evidence, and physio is definitely evidence based, but it's only looking at a very small portion of the evidence,
mm-hmm.
because often they'll just be looking at the Journal of Physio or research done by the top physio researchers. And again, when I did the S&C, I was like, oh, how often do physios read the Journal of Strength and Conditioning, or the Journal of Biomechanics, or the Journal of Motor Control, or Motor Learning? And I was like, there's so much here that we're missing by just being laser focused on physio evidence based.
Yeah,
And that's when I just realized that you can't just read Physio Network or those type ones. It's really helpful. But yeah, you need that broader perspective, and just to get to have a well-rounded insight into how to treat a human, you need to understand the psychology, the physics of movement, how the brain organizes movement, so motor learning. You need to know social science, so how they interact socially, what's their social situation. And it is kind of the biopsychosocial approach. I think with that, it's an awesome approach. I think pain sometimes gets too much the center position, whereas say someone like Peter O'Sullivan, who sort of really pushed that approach, he kind of focuses just as much on the function, which is the movement and retraining movement and movement patterns and watching someone's strategy and pattern. Whereas I think that's a bit missed, and we just think we just have to educate someone on pain. Whereas what we're doing, I actually did a recent course on behavior change, and it talked about self-efficacy, and basically the best way to improve someone's, or one of the best ways to improve someone's health or change their behavior or even improve their chronic pain is to build self-efficacy. And there's 3 ways you can help someone as a practitioner. So the first one is mastery experiences. So it's when someone actually does the experience or the thing they thought they couldn't do. So they actually prove to themselves that they can do the thing they thought that they couldn't. And you've got vicarious experience. So vicarious is when they see someone else perform the activity that they think they can't do. So they're living through someone. So that builds self-efficacy as well. And the third one is, I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically knowledge. So it's education. So the practitioner telling someone that they're resilient or that they can quit smoking or whatever, that builds self-efficacy too. So basically what we do as practitioners is we mainly use the knowledge, the education, and it's way less powerful. So yeah, research will show that mastery experiences is way highest in terms of building self-efficacy, and that's when someone actually proves to themselves that they can do the thing they didn't think they could do. So say in the case of say like low back pain and someone's fearful of lifting or flexing, basically we can educate them and tell them all we want. And this is a lot of what pain science goes down: education. And you can give them information, but it's very hard for someone else to take that on. It will improve their self-confidence, self-efficacy a little bit, but the main thing is when you just maybe even forget a little bit about the education, just get them out there and just say, okay, you're gonna prove to yourself that you can lift that, and just to do it, and that builds self-efficacy. Because at first I was kind of relating it back with a mate talking about rock climbing, and like I've got a pretty bad fear of heights, and one of my mates is just like super adventurous and just a good sort of outdoor, basically a leader, and should be like an outdoor whatever leader person. And I was saying that like I went rock climbing once with him in Margaret River, and I was saying that like it's very similar to if we're going rock climbing. Like he could beforehand tell me, you know, it's gonna be fine, you'll kill it, yada yada, like it's safe, whatever. But like that's not going to build my self-confidence and self-efficacy that much, because that's his opinion, it's not mine. But if you actually go out and you actually climb the rock wall and it's fine, that's that mastery experience. So that's the thing that builds self-efficacy, because I proved to myself that I could do it. And that's why movement, why getting someone in the gym or getting someone doing the thing they think they can't do is a way better way of treating these issues than just sitting someone down. And like the explaining is still important, but it's got way less power than the functional side and the movement side for building. Basically self-efficacy is what most of us need.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing that matters. And like you said, the education is important, but it has to be, I feel like the education has to be within the context of actually doing the thing. You know, like you can give the education almost as you go. Or if someone is, you know, really frightened, then obviously there's a role for just, you know, having a chat and exploring, you know, where these beliefs are coming from and so on. But
for sure,
you know, it's all very contextual, but at the end of the day, and it comes with, you know, pain education or manual therapy or whatever therapy you like, it like pretty much what you're getting at and what we try to preach is that it all comes back down to movement and function, because, you know, people obviously people don't want to be in pain, but for the most part, they don't want to be in pain because they want to be able to do something functionally or movement wise
Yes.
that the pain
Yes.
is stopping them from doing. And
Definitely.
so, yeah, you might get a change in pain by pressing on some joints, and that can be helpful in the right context and with the right education around that. But at the end of the day, if they're not moving and if they're not, yeah, having that mastery experience, or at least that feeling of progress in movement, and especially in movements that they feel restricted in or that are very relevant to them, then they're just going to be not going around in circles, or just sort of taking one step forward and one step back,
Definitely.
and
I think
not
that's
really,
sorry.
yeah. No,
Sorry,
go.
Kyle. I think that's super important. One thing I've really realized with treating people is like really getting to the bottom of what motivates this person to get buy-in
Mm,
with rehab. So it's like everyone wants to do something, like whether it's they want to be able to fish or garden or run a marathon. And it's like if you can get someone focusing a little bit away from the pain and focusing on the thing that the pain is stopping them from, for me, then it's quite easy to work backwards from there and go, okay, this is why we're doing, a half squat today, because you tell me that gardening or getting down on the ground with your grandkids is the most important thing to you in the world. And I'm going to tailor your rehab around getting down on the ground with your grandkids. And so that's why today you're doing a half squat. And then, like, I think that gets buy-in as well, because
for sure.
you're taking attention hopefully away from pain, but you're also telling someone exactly why you're doing this exercise, because people don't care if they get stronger quads or if they get stronger glutes or if they increase their knee flexion range. They're outcome measures that we care about. They just care about what's that going to allow me to do in the world that I care about. And I think finding that and digging like with a patient is super important to try and get that out and get buy-in. And then you've kind of, I guess, sort of hopefully won someone over because you're both working towards their goal, not like my goal,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. And often people haven't really even thought of it that much. Like sometimes
No.
people are like, "Oh, the pain has stopped me from doing this," but sometimes you're
Yeah.
like, "So what do you actually want to be able to do?" And they're like, "Oh,
Yes, that's
well,
the
I
best
kind of
question.
just want the pain gone." And it's like, well, yeah. So and it's delving deeper and really listening to what they're saying, and reiterating it back to them does build that, like you said, that feeling of teamwork, and I think that it would
Mm,
be described in the research as therapeutic alliance. And
yes.
it's been shown that therapeutic alliance is one of the most important factors for getting a good outcome,
Yeah,
regardless of what
definitely.
the intervention is. And if you can have that therapeutic alliance, which just means a good relationship, a good connection with your patient,
Yeah, definitely.
then you're going to get a lot more done, and they're much more likely to do things at home. And because, yeah, you could get, I think a lot of people fall into this trap of, oh, I'm feeling tired or in pain again, so I go and see my practitioner. They sort me out, which, you know, I feel good again for a week or two, and then I go back to that practitioner. And it, even if the practitioner gives them exercises to do at home, then if they haven't got that right therapeutic alliance, and they haven't really delved into the why they should be doing the exercises, if it's just something that they've been told to do because it's good, but they know that they get the pain fix from the therapist's hands or whatever, then they're like, oh, it's all right. Like, oh, yeah, I'll do the exercises, and then life gets in the way. But if it's that
Mm,
deeper meaning of like, oh, I know exactly why I need to do this exercise, it makes a lot of
mm,
sense for what I want to do.
mm.
And especially if you can make it fun, that's my big area of interest.
100%. Yes, definitely.
Then yeah, you're much more likely to get a proper outcome. And also, I think, obviously it's important for us as physios, but also to get across to the client that broader view of their movement health. And it's not just about this one body part. It's not just about this one function either. It's about the fact that, we are living out of alignment with our DNA in a lot of ways. And it's not just about doing certain exercises to improve one function, but it's about looking at what the human body should be doing as a whole, in terms of, like you and I have talked about movement nutrition, and we've done a podcast, or Mac and I did a podcast on movement nutrition, and yeah, improving not just the quantity and not just the quality, but also the variability, and doing more of different
Yes.
things, and
Yes.
even expanding the range. Like, I think it's really good to us, to understand what someone wants to do functionally, but also to expand their range of what they think is possible. Like, some people just don't think it's
Yes.
possible. Like, oh, I would never be able to run. So, I just want
Yeah.
to be able to squat. But it's like, well, are you sure you'd never be able to run? Or is that just
Yeah.
something that you've been told? Or why do
Exactly. Yeah.
expanding that
I think
range of what's possible?
I think yeah, he's made some really good points. I think definitely that question, what do you want to be able to do, really opens someone's mind,
Mm.
because often you'll hear them say, "Oh, I'd love to get back to tennis, but," and then you just kind of you leave space for them to answer, and you go, "Okay, so but what?" And they say, "But I couldn't." And then, like, asking a second question, they're like, "Oh, why not?" And then it gets them thinking. And I think even just that questioning opens the possibility in their mind that, like, you, as hopefully a bit of an expert, are not writing that off for them. Because I think
Mm.
most practice, not most, I mean, I'm not going to bag out other
Yeah.
practitioners at all, but I think what can be common is that we are often telling people what they can't and shouldn't be doing. And if you can be someone who maybe practices movement enough yourself to know how adaptable you can be or can become, then, like, you genuinely believe in your question when you say, "Oh, why not?" Like, I think we can get you there if we work backwards. Like, we can get, as long as you're willing to be patient, and as long as we can, yeah, slowly get there, we can get you back to that. And I think that instills a bit of confidence as well. Sometimes you get the, like, kind of roll of the eyes or the
Yeah.
crossed arms across the chest. But yeah, sometimes it just opens up this, like, oh, so potentially I could do that thing that I used to love to do. But yeah, I think that only comes when, as a practitioner, you understand how far you can take movement, or how far you can take the body, in terms of how it just will keep adapting to what you ask it to do.
100%. Uh,
Yeah.
I think that was something I also wanted to touch on, about your story, is that just the more you practice on yourself, like like you said, you could have done 8, 10, 15 physio courses, but probably got the similar amount of value from just actually learning how to move,
Oh,
or applying a
yeah.
movement system to yourself. And I found that so huge for me, is just, well, first of all, having injuries, and then trying movements, getting, figuring out what my body does and doesn't like, and why. And so becoming your own experiment. And that's what actually gives you, like you say, the confidence to say to someone, I think we can get you there. Whereas if you've never
Yes.
experienced it yourself, and
No.
if you've never experienced it yourself and you practice in a certain way, you've probably haven't experienced it with many clients. You can't really confidently say, I think we can get you there. And
Yeah.
you could try and say that anyway. You could try and, I guess, fake it and say, oh yeah, I think we can get you there. But if you don't really believe it,
Yeah.
then it's not going to come across well to the patient, and you're going to end up sort of just not giving them the confidence. But if you have got
Exactly.
all of that experience of, like, I've applied all of these principles to myself, I know they work, I don't know why. The same thing can be applied to you. You're a resilient and adaptable human, just like me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's all about that confidence. And I think, again, there's
Yeah.
therapeutic alliance, but also therapist confidence makes a huge difference in the outcome.
Yeah.
And
And I
I
think
think
you. Sorry. Sorry.
that's so good. Now, I was just going to say, the it's always hard on Zoom because of the
Yeah.
lag. But the story about your uncle being so confident and good with his manual skills, probably his just sheer confidence and belief in his skills
Yes.
would create so much of a better outcome for people. Whereas you're like,
Yes.
oh, one day I'll get there, but you
Yeah.
know that, oh, my skills aren't good enough.
Yeah. And I think you just reached the conclusion before me, basically, like
Oh, right.
early in
Okay.
his career than I did. And so basically all those courses, all I was searching for was confidence. Like I just wanted to get confident in what I was doing and I didn't find it. But as you said, I could have just done earlier what you did and experiment on yourself because you've proven to yourself and that gives you true confidence.
Yeah.
So that's where I kind of became a more confident practitioner from literally experience, not from knowledge. Well, the
Yeah.
knowledge along the way with it, but I had to live it as well. And with my uncle, yeah, you're right. Like he walks around and he's just so confident. He's got this air of like he just knows what he's doing, and like I respected him a lot for that, and his patients did too. And he genuinely is a very good manual practitioner, but it's the whole package. It's everything. People
Yeah.
feel safe. They feel like they can relax. They put their trust in him. He's also very good at the rehab side too, so he knows when to use both.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's everything with him. Like he's not, there and not speaking and just pressing on a neck, and he's coming in with he's super relaxed. He knows what he's doing. He teaches, internationally. People know that. Um, and so
There's
yeah,
so much that goes into it.
there's
Hey.
so much. Yeah,
I,
exactly.
I
Yeah,
think there was even a study. I can't remember the exact details, but they compared the outcomes of patients who walked into a reception room that had looked really fancy and had a good view and had I think even an attractive receptionist or something like that, versus the outcomes of a completely different reception room, like on the opposite end. And even that stuff makes a huge difference to patients' pain outcome. Like, yeah, how important
yes.
or successful they think the practitioner is, and how well the
Mm,
practitioner relates to them. And there's just so much that goes into pain that
mm,
you really can't. I mean, you can account for it to a degree and you can try your best to understand it all, but pain is such a multifactorial experience
mm.
that we can't really rely on it as an outcome measure. But you can rely on movement and function, and usually
Yes, yes.
improving movement and function is what gets people's pain away for the most part, when if it's musculoskeletal pain. um and I suppose your Instagram, and a big part of your interest, I know, is mechanics of movement. Obviously, the Instagram is mechanics of movement, and you've done a fair bit of, I guess, looking into biomechanics. And I've just actually done your biomechanics of running presentation, which I really liked. But I thought we could chat a bit about biomechanics and
Yeah,
how you
sure.
see that applying to rehab and performance, and just how you've applied that yourself in the
Yeah,
context
sure.
of everything else that we've just talked about in terms of pain and everything.
Yeah, sure.
It's a big
So
question.
biomechanics, yeah, it's just it's the same thing. So like, if you think, I think of it's cliche, but the art and science of movement. So it's like there's always that art side, which is the adapting system and the way we self-organize and motor learning, movement variability, and basically coordination and that that real art of movement that can't be measured. But then we still deal with the forces of Earth and
Yeah,
gravity with every step. So I still think you need to know about force and about joint movement and leverage and all these. They're still first principles, so it's just physics. So it would
yeah,
be like if I didn't understand biomechanics or have some understanding of it, it'd be like me trying to live in a world that disregards physics. And so I can understand biology and evolutionary biology, why the body adapted to the way it is. I can understand the psychology of movement, and yeah, that more sort of, as I said, movement learning, how the brain produces complex movements. But I still need the knowledge of physics as well. So if you don't have that, you're just relying on, two or three systems or two or three groups of principles to treat someone, but you're missing out on that other one or you're disregarding it. So
yeah,
don't like, I think some people look at biomechanics and they look at someone who just uses those principles. So they're just relying on physics and they're forgetting about the psychology and the biology and the social context. But I think to have that, again, well-rounded approach, you need to understand all areas. And to me, like understanding kinetics and, as I said, leverage and moment arms and torque is still super important. And it's not important for everyone. It depends on your caseload. But you need to, I think, have some understanding of how someone's even movement pattern will load a particular area. And that's where, like, in terms of, if you look at biomechanics being, so kinematics is basically motion, so that's movement. So that's the things we can't really measure. That's, how much does the knee bend when we swing it through in running, or how much do we flex the shoulder during a swimming stroke. And then you've got kinetics. So kinetics is the forces that impact on the body. So again, gravity and the ground reaction force. So I think just having that understanding of that helps me know when to use it and when not to.
Yeah.
But it does, if I'm looking at, say, someone's squat pattern and they've got knee pain, I want to know how their movement pattern is loading their knee, and if we can tweak it, change it to shift load around. And I think an understanding of biomechanics can help that as well. So as I said, it's not the be all and end all, but it's definitely something that in rehab, in sport, and in performance becomes more important the more you go towards that performance spectrum.
Like, I guess what you're getting at is it's another tool in the toolkit that can be drawn upon to solve problems. Because if you're a physio or any kind of health professional, really, you're in the business of problem solving and figuring out, someone's come to you with an issue and you want to figure out what that is. And like you said before, I think preventative things would be much better to roll out to the whole population, so that people aren't in this sort of reactive mindset where I only go to someone if I've got an issue. But that's probably a whole other topic in itself. But sorry, go on.
I think biomechanics, like, sometimes it's a lot different to what we think it is. So, like, biomechanics helps me to understand why in say walking compared to running, why we keep a straight leg through stance phase. And if I don't understand biomechanics, I don't understand what a bent knee in the stance phase of running is doing to my quads, and is doing to my knee joint, and is doing to the, and is gonna cause this kind of cascade of reactions that increases load through the knee and quad and increases the amount of energy consumption. So it just helps me understand movement and, like, how the body chooses a strategy based on biomechanical principles that either is for efficiency or takes load off a joint as well. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but
no, it does, because if you have that understanding of ways to increase efficiency and ways to load and unload areas, then that's how you guide someone through that process of mastery and self-efficacy that we talked about before. Like, if they're moving in a certain way and you have no idea how to change that movement or how to cue a change and for what reason, an easy example is someone's like excessively anteriorly tilting, then they're probably not breathing properly and they're probably not activating their core properly. And if you change that, often that can make a difference to someone's experience of that movement, whether it's pain or discomfort or range of motion. And then that person wouldn't have known. In fact, I was that person. I thought my core was good. I thought my core was strong. And it turns out I was really anteriorly tilting with squats. And that was contributing to my chronic knee pain. And I wouldn't have known that unless I'd had someone look at that. And, obviously my exercise physiologist, who's Kelly Mann, big shout out. She knows about biomechanics, and she's like, okay, let's tweak this. How does that feel? I was like, oh, that feels better. And it gives you that experience of like, oh, I can change my movement to change my symptoms, or to,
Yes,
influence how I feel in that movement. And then it's like, oh, well, what else could I change? What else could I, load here or do here? And then it all sort of builds that picture of that picture and that feeling of confidence of I can do something here. I'm in control. I have some level of control.
definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I think I use it in like, say I'm looking at someone's walking as well, and I'll see maybe just like a big Trendelenburg. So basically, Trendelenburg is when we're walking in single leg stance, if the if the stance leg hip muscles aren't strong enough, we get a big drop of the pelvis. And again, it might not be painful, we might not want to fix it, but I still want to know why someone's body chooses that strategy. And biomechanics helps me understand that, well, by dropping the pelvis, you're just moving the center of mass over that stance leg. So it's trying to make it easier for the hip muscles on the stance leg to work. So just understanding why someone's choosing brain has chosen a strategy, so which is more that kind of movement learning brain, um, self-organized decision, but why they did that from a biomechanical perspective as well. So why did that actually unload the knee joint because the quad was weak? Or why did they
Mm.
shift weight across and drop the pelvis because it shifted the center of mass across and made it easier, a smaller moment arm for the like, glute hip abductors. And so it's almost like it just gives me more insight into why someone's choosing a strategy. Um, so I can then say, okay, do we want to change this or don't we? Is this adaptive? Is it maladaptive?
Yeah.
Um, that sort of thing, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And knowing why they've probably compensated in that way, because the body is a master compensator, and almost everyone
Mm.
has some level of compensation going on in their body. But knowing why and what factors to address, say for in that example, it's like, okay, well, it's because of, well, in any example, it's because of XYZ that they're most likely compensating in that way. So if we if we specifically strengthen this muscle, or this range of motion, or increase this range of motion, or increase the load tolerance of this tendon,
Yeah.
then their body, because we know that human bodies can self-organize. Like they have all of
Yes.
these
Yes.
fundamental movement patterns ingrained within them, but they will compensate if there's areas of weakness or stiffness, or just areas that the brain doesn't feel confident or safe to move into. And so if we know why that is, then it gives us a better toolkit as to figure out how to reverse that if we want to.
100%. Yeah. The
Yeah.
body always follows a path of least resistance. So, like, again, just take someone. So, my old man has no hip extension range, so needs a hip replacement. So, with every step on that side, his body will find a way. So it'll still find a way to get his leg behind him, because it's very hard to walk if you can't get your leg behind you because you can't use your calf for push off.
Yeah.
So with every step, instead of hip extension, he'll rotate his pelvis to increase the effective step length.
Yeah.
Um, and like, I guess I could look at him and say, "Oh, you're limping," but I can't see why. I don't know what's going on here. But I think that that's more kinematics, but understanding, okay, where are you not getting motion from? Okay, you've got no hip extension. And what's that causing further up the chain? Okay, so you have to rotate your pelvis with every single step. Um, and that's where, like, again, the more you look at movement, you probably notice it too, like, you'll start to see patterns. Um, and when you see those patterns, you're not always going to try and intervene and change it like that pelvic drop, but I still want to know what that person's kind of pattern is, so that if they do end up overloading an area, or say for him, if he is rotating with every step, he's probably getting a lot of lumbar spine rotation all the time. So he's going to
Mm.
probably be quite jammed up through that left lumbar spine or facet joint. So, like, therefore, that's where like I think we do sometimes want to intervene with improving movement. Oh, we definitely definitely want to improve that. But if we don't know what we're looking for, if we don't have a good understanding of kinematics and what should be happening with walking or with running, then we don't know um, when someone's movement pattern, I guess, is maladaptive, or potentially if he ends up with, really bad low back pain, it may not be that he just needs to decrease his stress and he needs to sleep better. He probably does. But he's probably also got an issue functionally in that hip that needs to be restored. So it's like finding a balance between, sometimes literally stuff is biomechanical. Like
yeah.
there's a clear biomechanical cause to the pain. Not saying there's not other factors, but it's just knowing when. And I think a lot of new grads who completely disregard biomechanics and don't understand and look at movement, they don't know when to use that knowledge and when to say this is really biomechanical, because some stuff, as I said, is, some stuff is completely not, and there's like a spectrum. So some people, you go down a biomechanical path and it's a disaster because they get fixated on that. But other people, you go down a biopsychosocial path and it's a disaster because
Yeah.
all that stuff is like there's literally a joint that's causing massive issues here up the kinetic chain, and we didn't even look at them walk, or we didn't look at them go downstairs, or we didn't look at them squat. So we missed that like time when we did need to zoom in. And then again, sometimes we just need to sit back and zoom completely out and say, I don't care about that pelvic drop, I don't care about your stiffness in your ankle, you're just stressed, you're overweight, you don't move.
And there's so many factors that come into it. And I think it's important not to, and obviously, like you said, this gets more and more contextual. Like the greater you go in terms of performance, like the need for performance and everything, the more granular you generally have to get with biomechanics. But just for your average person, obviously it's important to know how their biomechanics might be affecting the way they're moving and compensating and the symptoms that they're getting. But also just not to, if someone's just moving, if they're just trying to improve their daily movements, you don't have to analyze them to the nth degree. It's just like,
No.
this is generally what you need to be doing. So let's strengthen in that range. And if, and give them like I said before, give them the toolkit as well to self-regulate, because again, people can get, in the similar way, people can get dependent on manual therapy. People can get dependent on, someone telling them exactly how to move at all times.
Oh, exactly. And you never want to do that.
And it's like, tune into your body. Don't, these are the things, these are the different variables you can play with. Tune into your body and be your own self experiment, and and listen to the signals that you're getting. And then that's, like we've been talking about the whole time, is a lot more empowering approach that actually gives someone that self-efficacy.
And I think with like, so if you go back to that pelvic drop, say, and say like I'm looking at someone and I see that pelvic drop in walking, I'm not mentioning that to them. Like I would never tell them. And my treatment might be, okay, do I want to fix this? Don't I? It's probably not an issue, but it's always better to have good glute med function. Maybe you just get them to stand on a beam. That could be, because they will self-organize to the point there that they won't drop their hip in that position, because if you do, you fall off. So their body will find a way. So that's where it's like, are we dealing with weak hip abductors that we need to strengthen glute med, or are we just dealing with a body that doesn't know how to keep a pelvis level? And we need to put it in an environment where keeping a pelvis level is the only option. They're getting immediate feedback about, did I keep my pelvis level? That's what we're looking at. But all they're thinking of is, did I fall off the beam?
Yeah.
And so
you don't have to cue them anymore. You don't have to cue, okay, lift your pelvis. It's the beam tells them, okay, you didn't do it properly. And the brain's like, oh, okay, that's another data set. That wasn't right. And then they get it. And then when they do get it, they're like, oh, look, I'm standing on the beam. And it's like a wave of, successful emotions rather than like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess I can kind of feel the glute working in that clamshell now.
Yeah. So that's it. So like that's where I'll use a lot of rehab with like I know what I want them to get, but I'm not going to cue it. I'm just going to put them in
Yeah.
an environment or like a task or a introduce constraints
Yeah.
to get them to self-organize their body. So to organize their body in space to create that desired thing that I want. So if I
Yeah.
want more, knee flexion in swing, or if I want them to stop dropping their hip or pelvis, or if I want to hinge at the hip, I'm going to have to create something where they're not even thinking about that. But the problem I've given them forces them into a solution that is what, that's what occurs almost. If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense, and that is kind of like the play-based approach. Is you change some
Mm.
variables and you force the brain to solve the problem of overcoming these constraints and moving in a way that it's almost like forcing a compensation that you want, or like someone's
Yes,
moving in
yeah.
a certain pattern and they don't have for whatever reason their brain doesn't have access to the way you sort of quote unquote want them to move, or to a different way of
Yes.
moving. And so they're constantly defaulting into this one movement pattern, and then you add a constraint and then the brain's like, oh, okay, what do I do here? So for example,
Yeah.
standing on a beam. Oh, this is a completely different surface, it's much more narrow, it's a little bit off the ground. Okay, what do I need to do to stabilize here? And then yeah, that play based approach, which everyone kind of scoffs at play. Well, not everyone. It's definitely becoming more, I
More
guess,
normalized. Yeah.
yeah, more normalized now. But in a general, like everyone's so work focused, like, oh, we just got to strengthen that glute. We just got to strengthen whatever or mobilize that
Mm.
joint. And it's like,
Mm.
yeah, but how's that integrating? And the only way to integrate it really is, I feel like, through that play based approach and
Yeah, it's
exploring and
learning.
getting
So play
creative.
is learning.
Play is
Yeah,
learning,
and
yeah.
so if you think about like this is how I think of movement variability. So say you've got a pebble on the ground and you want to pick it up. There's 1,000 different ways you could pick it up. Like you could squat, you can lunge, you can side flex down, you can extend back and pick
Pick
it
it up
up.
with your foot.
Yeah, pick it up with your foot, do whatever you want. But if we change that to a boulder, how many options do you have? So the first one,
Yeah.
you've got, say, 100 solutions. So all your brain cares about is solving movement problems. And the problem it sees when you're picking up a pebble is just, how do I get this rock from here up to waist level? That's all your brain wants to do. There's heaps of options, there's heaps of solutions. But if you change that to a boulder, you've still got the same problem, get this rock from here to here,
Mm,
but your brain's got way less solutions. So you can't pick it up with your foot anymore. You
yeah.
can't side flex. You can't probably extend back and pick it up. You've probably got to squat, a hinge, or a bend the back.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where like the flexion of the spine stuff's it's missing a bit of the picture, because if someone's only solution is flex the back, you've got one of three. And so you really need to open up variability and teach them literally how to lift with the straight back and how to squat. But if someone only knows how to hinge and doesn't know how to flex, they've only got one or two solutions to a problem where you need three or four.
Yeah.
And so that's where you want to teach them how to flex the back, because more solutions is better than less. Um, and so if you come back to like constraints, so say the person doesn't have a hinge pattern for whatever reason, they've forgotten, it's dormant, the life they live doesn't ever require them to do it. It's really powerful to introduce that pattern. You do kind of teach it, but you just want them to learn it. So then I might, depending on their skill, this is where constraints come into it. So if they're a really skilled learner, you can probably just show them and they'll be able to do it straight away. But if their movement skill is poor, you need to introduce constraints into the environment so the movement you want them to produce is the only solution. So that's where a constraint for me on a hinge might be, okay, I'm going to block the knee, I'm going to use a dowel on the back and get them to hinge. And again,
Yeah.
all I'm saying is I just want you to bend forward.
Yeah.
But the pattern that they don't have yet is the only one that they can use. And then as the skill is learned, so that's called like restricting the degrees of freedom. So they've only got the hips, the only degree of freedom there, because we've taken out the knee's still moving, but it's not really the shin, the shank, I guess.
Yeah.
Biomechanics is fixed. The trunk's pretty fixed. So then as skill is learned, you release degrees of freedom, and they should still be able to control it. And you've just opened that pattern. So that's variability, because that same person goes to that boulder, and previously they only had a back bend pattern, and maybe they didn't have a squat or a hinge, and you've given the brain access now. This is where, if they've learnt the skill, it should carry over if you've given them good cues. They should now have 3 solutions to something that they only had 1 to.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think they're like, this is movement in itself. Like when we learn a new skill, in the initial stages, we reduce degrees of freedom. So I've just been trying to learn to surf lately, and I just watch people with movement. And I noticed that the beginners, when they start, their knees are straight, they're upright, they don't move at the ankle. And so what we do there is we restrict our degrees of freedom, and we basically move block-like. And then as we improve our skill, as we develop that skill, we release degrees of freedom. So you'll see the knees bend, you see the ankles start to move, you'll see the pelvis start to twist, the trunk will start to twist. And then if you've got a professional surfer, they've got the most movement variability, because with every movement they actually get maximum amount of joints. So they'll start moving at the scap, they'll be twisting the trunk, they'll be twisting the cervical spine, and you see that in every single skill. So if you take someone learning to kick a footy, initially they're going to have a splint like leg. They're going to have the arms out straight, and they're just going to swing through. So they're restricting degrees of freedom because the brain doesn't know how to move more joints and segments at once. And then as they get better, an indication that they're learning the skill is they'll start to bend the knee. So they've increased degrees of freedom at the knee. They'll start to get dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. They'll start to bend the elbows. They'll start to lean the trunk a bit. And so they're, again, increasing movement variability because there's way more degrees of freedom in their system now. And that's where, if you look at top, I think you've read Playing with Movement.
Yeah. One of my faves.
Yeah, it's awesome. But I love the bit about like professionals, so the elites, so say like a Tiger Woods, I don't know if he's still elite or not, don't know much about golf, but they notice that the professionals or the elites have more movement variability than like sub-elites.
Yeah.
And it seems kind of counterintuitive, but basically they just adapt to the environment and the conditions far better. So each shot, in terms of like what they do with their wrist, their elbow, their scap, their thoracic spine, is slightly different. It's slightly more variable. Whereas sub-elites move very similar each time, but the elites, where they hit the ball will be much, much more similar compared to the sub-elites.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's basically just adaptability to the context and the environment, and the more you've practiced and the more you've played, and obviously there's some, I guess, inherent levels, well, maybe debatable, but the more talent you've got, the more you've practiced and the more you've played and experimented, the more you're going to be able to adapt to the right circumstance.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's why they perform so well, because they're not stuck in this certain pattern of, oh, I have to swing the golf club like this, or I have to kick the footy like this. It's like, oh, what if I kick it like this? Oh, okay, that happened. What if I kick it like this? And then it's, it's that play-based experimental
Yeah.
approach that
Exactly.
actually
Learn
gets
from doing.
people good. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. I think the other
Yeah.
interesting thing, I'm reading a book called The Language of Coaching by
Oh,
Nick
yeah.
Winkelman. And basically, what we like, what's so coming out consistently in the research is the importance, like if we're teaching movement or someone's learning it, is the importance of like an external cue. So, say on the beam, if you told someone, okay, I want you to grip with your toes, what they'll actually do is they will become way more rigid, and they will again constrict those degrees of freedom. So they'll probably like lock the knee joint, lock the ankle, and if they're trying to learn, it's going to be detrimental to them learning, because the brain doesn't learn movement like that. The brain, you need to just give it a problem. And so one example they give in this is like when someone's playing darts, if you tell them that I want you to focus on the trajectory of the dart versus I want you to bend and extend your elbow. So the second cue is internally focused. So someone focuses on the body, whereas the first one's more problem or like goal focused. So the second, when you give someone the internal cue to think about the elbow, again, their movement will be much poorer quality, and
Yeah.
the result will be much poorer quality than someone that's focused on the trajectory. Yeah, that just shows up time and time again that we don't do well. And it's even when you think about like athletes, so choking in sport is often due to the person starting to think about the internally about the movement rather than the goal of the movement. And so they'll start to like freeze up literally their motor system because they're thinking about movement. Movement's not really designed to be consciously thought of.
Yeah.
And sometimes I give this example of like, I'm a shocking dancer, but on the dance floor, you can see someone who's self-conscious, like literally conscious of the self, like they're
Yeah.
thinking about their movement because they're rigid and they're not free and flowing. Whereas the person that's not thinking is free to move because there's no thought. Like movement you don't need to think.
Yeah, you don't think about the movement, you just feel it. Especially when you're dancing, you just feel what's happening with the music, and your body moves accordingly in whatever ranges of motion you've got access to, and it feels awesome. And then it feels terrible to be dancing self-consciously. It's like, oh, what am I doing here?
Done that many times.
Everyone's looking at me, and I feel like an idiot. And then you get
And
off
you
the
do
dance
look
floor.
like an idiot because
Yeah.
like your body doesn't want to think about shit. It just wants to like about stuff. Sorry, it just wants to like get something done, and it wants to be
Yeah.
like free and flowing and coordinated. And that's where we actually learn. And that's where you go back to play again, because play's not, you're not thinking about stuff, but you're learning trial and error.
Yeah. And you're
And you're
just
getting
immersed in the
feedback.
activity. Yeah. And
You're
feedback.
immersed,
Yeah.
and feedback's massive. So if
Yeah.
you're not getting much feedback from your the task at hand about was it not just was it successful, but did we sort of achieve the goal of the movement? Then you're probably not going to learn movement. But if you're getting feedback, and feedback can just be, did I fall off the beam?
Yeah.
Or did
I drop the
I
hacky sack?
did I drop the hacky? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you're going to then
Yeah.
readjust your strategy because you're like, oh, that didn't work. So, or did I fall
Yeah.
off the surfboard? And so
Yeah.
you've got
Yeah.
that
Exactly.
immediate feedback. Okay, and you don't even think this consciously, but your body's then working out, okay, that didn't work. How do we adjust our movement, this, that,
Yeah.
to make sure that next time, because we know what the goal is. The goal is to stand up and not fall off the board. The goal is to hit your hacky sack with your foot. So it's just that, yeah, immediate feedback
Yeah.
massively accelerates learning. Yeah,
Which provides the data. It's yeah, people can sort of get frustrated and like, oh, like I keep failing at this, I keep falling off the beam, or I keep dropping the hacky or whatever. But your brain is just getting more and more data about what does and doesn't work in certain contexts, and then it puts all that together, and then suddenly or not so suddenly you get this, oh, I just did it, like wow, awesome. and
100%.
then and then now I can move on to another more complex problem, and that's actually the best way to learn, and it also is sort of feels the best in terms of yeah,
Yeah,
like we said, like the dancing example, it just feels good to be able to move like that and to push through challenge. Like yeah,
yeah,
it might be challenging and frustrating, but when you push through and get it, it's like the best feeling.
exactly. And I think the key is as well exactly what you're saying, and making sure that the problem needs to be still achievable. So if you took me out
Yeah.
surfing at Bells Beach where it's massive, it's just going to be too challenging, and the failing is not going to give
Mm-hmm.
me enough kind of feedback. Like it's going to decrease my confidence. But also, if you took me down where the surf was, ankle high, or the waves were ankle high, and just catching in, that's not challenging enough for learning either. So
Yeah.
like we need to find for ourselves, or for like our clients, whatever, that right amount of challenge where it's like it's stimulating enough that they can get it with a lot of concentrated like effort, but it's not too hard or too easy, basically.
Yeah, yeah, that Goldilocks zone between,
Yeah,
yeah, it's yeah, it's so important, and then that's the value of having a guide to help people find that Goldilocks zone. Because if people are left to their own
exactly.
devices, often it can be like they're just not starting at the right progression, or they're
Hmm.
just not knowing how to progress once they've mastered a certain thing, and then it just falls off the wayside. But if you have someone or some program or some kind of guidance to help you go from to stay in that Goldilocks zone consistently over time, then that's where the real magic happens.
Yeah, and I think if I look at like someone like you, for instance, and I see you balance on the beam, and I'm like, oh shit, like that's way too intense. I could never do that. But if you had, and this is kind of why I tried to video stuff along the way, if I saw footage of you 2 years ago or 6 months ago and you were where I was now,
Mm,
that gives me sort of more confidence too. Because I'm like, oh, James is like, he's awesome at it, but he wasn't, but now he
yeah,
is.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's like, okay, so I don't
You
need
could
to
do that
film and do
if you scroll through my Instagram.
it.
It's
Yeah, I probably could.
yeah. I
Where you
ca-
just like two legs falling off. Now you're doing
yeah, honestly, when I first
backflips and
started,
learning it.
mind you, I did pick it up very quickly because I just played a heap on it.
Yeah,
But and I wasn't filming for most of that time that I was picking it up. But certainly my skills have progressed a lot on it.
yeah.
But
Do
now I'm
you,
going to do that.
do
I'm
you,
going to look through my
yeah?
Instagram.
Do you get people who kind of come to you and say like, "Oh, you're just naturally good at that," or like,
I think some people see me on it and yeah, and just think that I have had a natural talent for it or something, or like, whoa, that's amazing, but I could never do that. But it is, I really do see it as a big expression. It's like a dance. Honestly, the beam is like a dance, and it's an expression of what ranges of motion you have control over and how well you can dynamically integrate all these different body parts to remain stable. And especially if you chuck some music on, it's like a dance. But it's an indication, like there's certain things that I do on the beam that look really crazy, but it's because I can perform that skill on the ground, like a sissy squat or like a back bridge or something like that, which means I can get into this funky position on the beam where it's like, whoa, how did he save that? But the only reason I could do it is because I had access to that range of motion. I already was strong in that
yeah,
range of motion. And so
yeah,
it's sort of,
exactly,
just practicing on the beam probably won't get you to my level on the beam, but doing beam
mm,
plus strength work plus groundwork plus, breathing and XYZ, then that will allow you to express things on the beam. And that obviously goes for everything, any kind of skill.
exactly. And I think that's a thing. People sometimes want to look at someone who's world class at balancing on a beam. And they want to just write it off as like, oh, he's just naturally good at that.
Yeah.
But like, it lets you off the hook if you think like that.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
watching, that Alex Honnold free solo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's like, obviously he has some unbelievable talent, and also like some sort of mental
Yeah.
strength or craziness.
Something. Yeah.
But
A
like,
bit of both.
to watch, yeah. So basically, if anyone doesn't know, so he climbed the Yosemite or
Yeah, El Capitan in
El
Yosemite. Yeah.
Capitan, free solo, so without ropes or anything, so rock
Yeah.
climb.
One of the hardest
But
climbs, basically.
yeah, but basically, I think it's better to see someone like that and go, "Oh wow, he's just a human," like,
Yes.
and just
Yes.
almost view it
Different
as
lens.
like, I. You might not say like, "Oh, I could do that," but it's better to think you have the potential that isn't a possibility if you wanted it to, rather than
Yeah.
write off that person as like just super talented and like born with gifts and like.
Yeah.
So that's the easy option, because then you're like, oh, just happy to sit at home on the couch and never try anything. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying like you're going to go out and rock climb or anything, but it's just
It-
better to think of the potential.
yeah.
Um,
And yeah, you don't have to necessarily go, oh, I want to go and free solo a cup of tan, but it makes you go, oh, I could rock climb if I put my mind to it. If I,
yeah,
had a
it,
crack, I could probably do it. And
it
that
makes you
feeling,
just realize, that you're just a human and that
yeah,
guy's a human.
yeah,
And like, he's done this. It's like, oh, what could I do that I want to do if I
yeah.
just worked at it?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, actually, that might be a good point to wrap up on. We're sort of, I know you and I could talk for hours and hours, and I am definitely keen to get a follow-up podcast going. Probably maybe next time I'm in Melbourne or down in
Yeah,
Victoria
sounds
that
good.
way.
Yeah,
Um,
perfect.
but I thought, usually it's good just to ask about, like, if you've got any projects on the go. Obviously, I mentioned the running biomechanics presentation, and I think you're working on one for walking as well. Anything that you want people to
Yeah.
know about?
So yeah, that's probably the main thing. So just started. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I called it a little sort of online course called the Fundamentals of Movement.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's the stuff some of it's the stuff I learned in the S&C course. There's like a bit of a hint of strength and conditioning tones in it, but it's also a mixture of sort of biomechanics and some of the motor learning, movement learning stuff. So I've finished the running biomechanics one, so that's just on my website, Mechanics of Movement.
Highly
And then
recommend.
I'm about to, thanks mate, about to put up just a gait biomechanics presentation recorded. So you just basically get it, you can download it from a Dropbox folder. But gait, I think walking we don't think of enough. And I kind of in it try and talk about the evolution of walking and how the body's adapted for efficiency. Talk a bit about biomechanics and the forces that interact on the body. And then I look at common gait compensations. So it'll be it's about an hour long, I think. And
Sweet.
it's just kind of a bit of an insight into different perspectives of gait.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Well, I'll hang out for that one as well. I'll definitely get on that one too. And yeah, man. Well, we'll have a follow up and hopefully hear more about the fundamentals of movement one as it progresses.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, mate. Really
Thanks for the chat.
it.
And thanks, guys, for listening. Catch you next week.